I'm Austin Frederick. Some of you probably maybe recognize me. I used to work here, maintenance department, from 2015 until 2019, and I took great pride in this building, taking care of it, all the mechanical stuff, and just making sure the history is preserved. And ever since then, I've been really working on documenting the history, learning new things about it, and trying to preserve this. Once I started digging into it, I realized there was a lot of information there, a lot of interesting facts. Like anything with government, there was a lot of criticism, a lot of heads butting, and but we got the courthouse built. So I've had a passion about this place since the day I started working here, and I'm just happy people come and listen to it and get excited about it as much as I do. So after I was done here at Winnebago County, I went to the Oshkosh YMCA for a year and a half. Then I went to Outagamie County, and now I work for Hortonville Area School District for their maintenance department. A lot of history up there too, if anyone recalls the teacher strike that happened up there in the 70s. Apparently they don't like talking about that. So yeah, this is a labor of love, just learning about the history of the courthouses we've had here in Winnebago County. So just some background information. Our first courthouse, the very first one, very primitive, was built over where, if you're familiar, where Court Tower is. That was the original county grounds. It was donated by these three gentlemen, Mr. Miller, Farnsworth, and Wolcott. Funny story, actually, Oshkosh wasn't the original county seat in our county. It was out in Butimore, but then Oshkosh stole it back, and Butimore was not happy about it. I think there were some back dealings there with some of the people down in Madison, and they made sure that Oshkosh got the title. So actually the first session of court was held in a schoolhouse here in Oshkosh until they had the new courthouse built in 1849, and then in 1850 they built the first county jail, which, you know, this is right when Wisconsin's still very much, well, it was a territory until 1848, but it's still very, you know, not a lot of people here, so very, very primitive establishment they built there. All right, so like I said, it was very primitive facilities. Small, made of wood. It wasn't fireproof. Oshkosh was prone to fires. It was so primitive that they didn't really even hold much court there. They ended up renting out some other buildings in downtown Oshkosh to hold court just because there was a lack of space. It just wasn't a very good building. But they kind of just threw it together because they needed something. Like I said, the jail was very, very primitive, oak timbers. I think there was a story where the jail caught on fire and the one prisoner they had in there burnt to death. And people were surprised at what happened because people could easily get out of the jail. So this was an article from the Oshkosh Democrat at that time, just basically saying how bad the facility was and how Oshkosh, you know, needed something better. The county needed something better. So this original courthouse, actually, it stood until 1949. Our organization tried to save it in the 40s. We had it was moved off those grounds at some time, and a mill on the river used it as storage. Well, our organization got it, had it moved to where the second courthouse would be, and we were going to restore it. Well, we couldn't raise the funding for it, and at that time, after they built this building, the county sold that lot to the city, and the city took down that other courthouse, and they told us, you need to do something with this building or we're taking it down. So we tried and tried raising the money for it, trying to put a plan together to save it. Ultimately, the County Historical Society couldn't do it, and the city stepped in and said, well, we're taking it down. So at one time we had all three of the courthouses in our county standing at one time. So our second courthouse, built in the same location where Court Tower is today, was started in 1857, and this was a much more grand building. Might be kind of hard to see on that photograph, but Greek Revival was constructed with Milwaukee Cream City brick for the facade. The lower level, it's kind of a basement, lower level is where the jail was, so they kept the inmates kind of in this basement level. It took a couple years to get done. We had, the country was kind of getting closer to that Civil War period. There were some issues with contractors securing the funding to get it built. But ultimately, we got a beautiful courthouse. It had a beautiful dome. There's a, I think if anybody's familiar with Dan Radig, he does like folk art painting here in Oshkosh. He did a very nice painting of this building. It's pretty cool. Would like to get my hands on it. And then in 1872, they were like, we want to change the way it looks. So they completely remodeled the facade. They get rid of the Greek Revival look, and they add a third story to it and this cupola with a bell in it. And the bell is actually in a church on North Main Street. The county sold it to this church in like the 19-teens, 1920s. So it's now used at the church for ringing on Sundays. I believe William Waters, he was a prominent architect here in the city. He worked with the county to make these changes. And then in 1872 or 1875, they needed an addition, more space for records, space for jail in the basement, offices. There wasn't running water in the city at that time, so they needed water tanks to supply for the jail and various parts of the building. So they added this wing on the east addition. And William Waters was part of these additions over the years. And then 1885, they added another wing on the west side, sheriff accommodations, more record storage, can never have too much record storage. And some of the newspaper articles actually like give descriptions of how they built, it was supposed to be fireproof. They had all these thick slate they used and brick and steel. Some other improvements that were made, they got telephone. 1887, the waterworks ran a pipeline to the courthouse, so they didn't need the water tanks anymore, got rid of those. Up until 1890, to heat the building, they needed coal or wood in small like stoves in each of the rooms, so they got rid of that and had a central boiler system to heat the building. And for whatever reason, I will never understand, they painted the beautiful Cream City brick red in 1892. Don't know why. And I have to do some more investigation on this, but in the early 20th century, there was, I don't know when they did the wiring, but in 1917, there was like big concern that the wiring was done incorrectly by the contractors, and there was this fear of burning the building down. Because before that, it was all gas lighting. They had gas piped in, and then chandeliers and sconces throughout the building that lit it. And Oshkosh, very prone to fires. We almost lost our courthouse in 1875 when the fire swept through in April that year. Luckily, all the Register of Deeds, the county treasurer, and the county clerk, they saw the fire coming. They threw everything on wagons and hauled it to somebody's house nearby that'd be out of the way of the fire. And from what the newspaper account says, the sheriff was not going to let the courthouse burn. So he rounded people up that were running away, and they formed a bucket brigade, and they hoisted water up to the roof and just started dousing the courthouse with water to prevent it from catching on fire, which they saved it. It worked. He talked about how the inmates in the basement were screaming and hollering to let them out because they didn't want to burn to death, but the sheriff said, no, we are not going to let the courthouse burn. Can imagine what kind of lawsuit that would be now. There were a couple other small fires in the building in the 1890s and in the turn of the century. They found damaged chimney that was installed incorrectly. Later on, there was a floor that sagged and broke a water line in the record storage area. Luckily, they didn't lose any of the records. One of the only known photographs that I know of the courtroom inside that courthouse. And from what I understand, there was only one courtroom. The rest were county offices, jury rooms, the jail in the basement, obviously. City court was over in City Hall, and that wouldn't be part of the county building until this building was built in the 30s. This is actually down in the county boardroom. Somebody else also did a portrait of, or a sketch of what that building looked like before they painted it. And after they painted it red. This was, I believe, right before they moved out of that courthouse to come here. They were moving the records and people over, and somebody decided to snap some pictures before they moved out of there, and it was eventually tore down. So in 1939, like I said before, the county sold that property to the city, and then they actually used WPA funding, which was part of the New Deal, to put people that were unemployed to work by dismantling the courthouse, and they actually reused some of the materials to build some other buildings here in Oshkosh. Like I think it's on the corner of 6th and Ohio. There's like an old fire station, I think fire station number 6 it was. That was using materials from that, and the old Oshkosh post office that was tore down around that time too. And I guess they were looking for a time capsule too, and they tore this down. They didn't find it, and they took some of the rubble and spread it out someplace on the west side of town where they were filling in some swampy area for development. And somebody over there was walking through and found this lead box and opened it up. Well, here it was, the time capsule that had been in the cornerstone of this courthouse. They found it laying in the rubble that they brought over there. And from what I understand, that was donated to the public museum at that time, so I don't know if they still have it. So that's when we get to this courthouse. Just kind of a roadmap, if you will, of just how long it took to get this project from start to finish. So about 20 years it took. In 1918, the county board, obviously being in the building they were in, built in 1860, knew it was getting close to being time to have a new courthouse. I mean, there had been so many additions put on that, technology had changed so much over time that it was just kind of cobbled in, like the electrical, the water, the heating, and it was getting really outdated. So they knew the day was coming soon when they needed a new facility that could meet the needs of the county. And it was this man, the county board chairman, John C. Thompson, that started a courthouse building fund, which really served as the nest egg of getting this project done. So the initial project, I believe it was in the 20s, 1926, they kind of formed a committee to say, let's go out and look at some potential areas that we could build this new courthouse. These are just a few of them that I've been able to find. So they talked about building on the old site where on Court Street. Well, at that time there was a lot of mills, it was next to the railroad, just a very dirty industrial area of the city, and people didn't want court over there. They didn't want people to have to come over to that part of town for court and for county business. So they started looking at other areas to have the courthouse. A lot of people wanted it to stay there just because they already had the land. Why not build where they already were? Some of the other locations were up in Neenah. There was a suggestion that, well, why don't we just move it up to Neenah, move the county seat up there, which people did not like that idea. That did not go over well, and that was shot down pretty quick. The one that really kind of stuck with everyone was called the Clark Kennedy site, which is where we are now. Those two properties owned by the Clark and Kennedy family. This site they thought would be the best area because it was away from that industrial zone. Jackson Drive was, a main thoroughfare through the city, so they thought having it there would be best because it was a main drag. People were traveling there anyway. We should have it in that busy part. And people on the other side said, it's already busy enough. Why would we add a courthouse there? There was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of opposition to even building, to moving, and then there was a lot of people supporting this building here. And the one I love the most, the quote we got is from our then district attorney, David Allen, when he said that when we build this building, it must be the pride of the entire county. I think it was just a very well said, like, we're going to build something, we need it to stand out, we need people to drive by it and say, you know, this is a great building, and be proud of it. So it's kind of a map of where we are now, the corner of Algoma and Jackson. Picture of one of the houses, and the other one's a sketch of the Clark house on the corner there. So 2 beautiful homes that were eventually taken down to build this building. So 1926 was also the year they're like, well, we're not going to decide this, we're going to leave it to the voters of Winnebago County. Should we build this? And if we're going to build it, should we build on the new site or on a new site or on the old site? Well, they put it on the ballot and it failed. So that kind of shelved the project a little bit, but nonetheless, discussion still continued. They knew eventually down the road this was going to happen. They needed to do this. There were attempts to basically liquidate the fund, the building fund, which failed, thankfully. There were other votes to build, those failed, they just weren't ready yet. But then, like, the ultimate thing that put the brakes on the project was the Great Depression, because the floor just fell out, and the county board at that time said, now's not the time to do this, not when everybody's suffering. So the Great Depression, pretty bad in Oshkosh. I mean, our main industry was lumber products, so building materials, shingles, doors, lath, all of that. Well, people weren't building during the Depression. So we saw wages drop, a decent amount here, rise in unemployment, factories, cut back on production. The Neenah-Menasha area was okay only because they were making paper products. Well, people still needed, stationery for writing, toilet paper, tissue paper, stuff like that. So Oshkosh was definitely hit a little harder than the rest of the county. But with Franklin Roosevelt being elected, we get these New Deal projects coming into play. So 1933, we sort of see this revival of it. As I know here, the building fund actually, I mean, it was pretty good, $190,000 they had set aside for this. But this is where we get these relief projects like the PWA and the WPA, both kind of doing the same thing. From what I understand, the Public Works Administration did bigger projects, like the Hoover Dam was a PWA project. They did larger, like, federal buildings, state buildings, courthouses, highways. And then the Works Progress Administration came a little later, and they did some of the same things, but they were on a smaller scale, like sewer systems and like fixing roads, stuff like that. So in 1934, a new sites committee was formed to, look into some more locations to do this. But the Clark Kennedy site was always there. Everybody always had their mind on this location to build the new courthouse. So the county board went on record in November of that year to say, we are going to do this, we need to do this, we're going to build a courthouse. And that's basically where things really started to get serious. They really started to look into building this courthouse. 1935, they purchased this lot for $50,000 using that building fund. And then by December 1935, the county board voted to build. Now, in between January and December that year, they did apply for a PWA grant from the federal government to help fund this. And it just, for whatever reason, there was something going on in Washington. I need to do a little more research on it, but it just kept getting kicked down the road. I think there wasn't enough money budgeted for it, and politicians in Washington were fighting, go figure. And ultimately, the county board just said, forget it, we're not waiting. This is our opportunity to do this. We have support on the county board, we have support in the communities. We're going to build without federal funding. That did not make people happy. There were quite a few critics to, one, purchasing this site where we're at. people thought the county overpaid for it by like $25,000. Some of the main reasons they didn't like this being the spot for the courthouse, people worried about their property values, because where we're sitting now up here was the jail. Like, these were all holding cells in here. So people were not keen on the idea of having a jail in their neighborhood. They thought their property values were going to go down. They didn't want prisoners escaping and being in their neighborhood. There was people that said, well, why did we buy another piece of land? We have land, just tear down the courthouse we have and rebuild. There were legal battles between the county and the city. The city had an injunction against the county saying they couldn't build because it went against zoning laws at that time. So the district attorney for the county pretty much walked in the city hall and said, you know what? We're going to build whether you like it or not, so fix this and let's just be done with it. After that, it took like a year, and they finally rezoned it to allow courthouses to be built. And then citizens were mad with the city for doing that, so they sued the city, saying, why did you issue this to them? They can't do this. And there was just legal scuffles back and forth. Ultimately, everything was dismissed, and plans moved forward. And there's always got to be that main villain. There's always that one guy that needs to stir the pot. And if there's anyone that did not like the idea of this courthouse being built, it was this guy, John Valentine Faber. So Mr. Faber he lived in Oshkosh for a long time. He worked at the Daily Northwestern as telegraph operator for the AP News. So any news coming into Oshkosh, this guy was the first to know about it, because he had to transcribe the Morse code into words, and then that's what got published in the paper. So he did that for many years, 31 or 32 years, and the only reason he had to retire was because machines took his job. So Morse code went through that, and it could print it out on paper. But he was also a piano salesman out of his house, but he was also very involved in local politics. And I was telling Judge Bissett that I was up till 1 o'clock this morning because I went down a rabbit hole with this guy. Like, I found a whole bunch of information. And I feel like back then, this was that guy where when he walked into like a city council meeting or, a county board meeting, they were probably all like, oh God, no. He had something to say about everything. He ran for a common council spot, which he didn't like the commission government of Oshkosh. He wanted it to have aldermen again. He ran for that position, lost in a primary. They were looking at redoing the sewage system in Oshkosh as part of that relief funding during the Depression. Well, Mr. Faber came in and said, that's too expensive, we can't do that, even though there was health officials that were like, your water quality is horrible here. Like, the Fox River was polluted with human waste. The waterworks was sucking in some of that stuff. Lake Winnebago, people were swimming and coming out with like rashes and stuff just because the water quality was horrible. And this guy fought that. There's something with the Winnebago County Fair Association he didn't like, something they were doing with the funds. He was at a county board or a Fair Association meeting for that, and it's just funny reading like the back and forth that he had with people with the government, and they basically told him to shut up and stay in his place multiple times. And he was definitely an outspoken critic of building this courthouse. With every villain, there's got to be a hero too. And I think one of the biggest heroes of this project was the county board chairman of that time, Jeremiah Shea. He lived out towards Pickett. I think he was elected to the county board in 31 or 32, and then elected vice chairman. And then when the chairman of the board retired in 1934, he automatically took that position, which he held until 1953. So he was responsible. He was the chairman of the new sites committee in 1934 to seek out a new location to buy a courthouse, which he always thought this was the perfect place for it. And then once the vote to build happened, he led the building committee project of planning, designing, and executing it. So he really kept the project moving. He kept the public informed, even though Mr. Faber was always like, trying to stop it. So if anyone kept John Faber in check, it was this guy. Some more stuff I found out at midnight this morning. Just all the different sketches there were of potential plans for the courthouse. This was one that was recently donated to us. Gentleman bought a picture. This thing's huge. He bought a picture at a garage sale or an estate sale, and he opened up the back, and this was tucked away in the back of it. And this was a sketch done by Aller, Jensen, and Brown. They were an architectural firm here in Oshkosh. So they submitted some ideas of what a courthouse could look like on the corner here. This one, there was a JA here that I thought found this at an antique store or an estate sale or something. And she had it in her office. I'm like, where did you get that? And she told me the story about it. And then I think she gave it to Judge Seifert when she was still here, and it was framed and in her office. So hopefully it's around in the courthouse yet. Maybe in another judge's office? Okay. So, and this one, I found a newspaper article last night that said one of the sketches done for the courthouse went missing. And I'm like, I wonder if this is the one, because it was found in like an antique store or something like that. But yeah, there was an article how, let's see, it was the Weeks and Vitzhume company out of Sheboygan. It was a dual partnership because they were building a courthouse in Sheboygan. And there was the architectural firm William F. Weeks out there, and then there was Conrad Vitzhume down in Chicago, or Carl Vitzhume in Chicago. They were building the courthouse in Sheboygan, and they had submitted sketches for our courthouse, and that's the one that went missing. Just some other sketches they had in the paper of other companies or architectural firms that submitted ideas. I thought this one looked pretty cool. Kind of looks like a casino in Vegas. This one, so our building was designed by Ballenbacher and Granger out of Chicago, or Granger and Ballenbacher. This was one of their first concepts that they submitted for what the courthouse could look like here. It's actually funny because the county had picked Aller, Jensen, and Brown and that Vitzhume out of Chicago to work together, but then they couldn't agree on, because they had to split the revenue from designing it, and they couldn't agree on that, so the county board essentially fired them, said we're going to pick someone else, and they hired Granger and Ballenbacher. So this was one of their first sketches of what this courthouse could look like. This is one of their preliminary blueprints of what this courthouse could look like. They had some sort of like arch with a statue, and like the doorways are arched. And then this is ultimately what the final concept was of what we have now, done by Granger and Ballenbacher. So by December 1936, everything was set. They had the architectural plans ready to go, and they put out the contracts for building the courthouse. And then on January 14th, 1937, Jeremiah Shea turned the first scoop of dirt to kick off the courthouse building project. These are some photos, probably in that binder you're talking about. Somebody just was there taking pictures as the building was being constructed. You're putting in the jail equipment up here. That might be in this room, actually, because everything was split up here. You had women's, men's, boys, girls. There was a kitchen, laundry room, day rooms. And here was like individual holding cells. Here they're lifting the limestone into place. This would be on the, I call it the front side, the Algoma Boulevard side of the building. It's just funny. I mean, these guys are just walking around on planks, no fall protection or anything. When they were renovating the building back in 2017, 2018, they found packs of cigarettes, whiskey bottles. I found a milk bottle in the wall. So they worked through January through the spring, through the summer, through the winter, and then through the next spring, and by the next summer they had completed the project. So this is just kind of a time lapse I put together of the construction of the main structure and then the facade going up. And this is by August of 1938. Some of the interior views. I can't believe they got rid of the light fixtures that were in this building. They were beautiful. If you go up to Winnebago County Courthouse, because that one was built shortly after ours, some of these fixtures, I believe the ones in this courtroom, they have the same ones in their building. So it'd be great to copy those and get some of those back here. Some pictures I took while I worked here. I don't know if anyone remembers, but I polished the letterbox downstairs. I was trying to get inside to see if there was anything in it, and I was like, we don't have a key for this thing. We were trying to take the hinges off to open it, and our boss came by. He's like, you know that's a felony, breaking into a mailbox. I'm like, So he had to call the post office, and he came down with a key, and he opened it, and I said, can I have a copy of that? He's like, no. I'm like, why not? It's a key to our mailbox. No, because this opens every other mailbox in the city. I'm like, oh, okay. So I think there was just some cigarette butts and gum wrappers in there. Some other interesting facts about the details outside. All of the sculptures done at the entrances and on the facade were done by this guy, Alfonso Iannelli. He was an Italian-American sculptor out of Chicago. He met Frank Lloyd Wright's son. I can't remember what his name was. Is it William? Well, anyways, he introduced him to his dad, and they worked together on some projects down in Chicago, Midway Gardens, and he did some sculptures there, and Mr. Wright took credit for it, and it did not sit well with Iannelli, so they kind of broke apart and went their separate ways, but he continued to do great work. It's one of his, as far as I know, one of his sketches that he did as he was planning these sculptures on the exterior of the building. And so if back a few pictures, if you remember, they were putting on the facade, the limestone, they were all blank. So those didn't come pre-sculpted. They put them in place, and he came up here and sculpted them on site. And he used air hammers for it, which I guess in the sculpting world was like taboo, because a true sculpting artist uses a hand or a chisel and a hammer, and he was using an air hammer. So here's that entrance I was talking about. And then in some of the pictures we have, you can just make out them doing the work there, air chiseling these pieces in. So when we were doing the project here, they took out the old revolving door, brass revolving door part where the security center is. And when they opened that up, they found this. It was like a small plaster. Basically, this is what the sculptor would have used to, he's looking at this as he's making his sculptures on the entrance there. So when he was done, he must have thrown this one into the wall as like a time capsule. So we thought that was pretty cool when we found that. Too bad he didn't have more in there. But this is sitting in a box in down on Knapp Street at Facilities Department. Should be on display here, but some of the firsts in the courthouse. So they let the Junior Chamber of Commerce use, I'm imagining, the lounge downstairs to hold their meeting here, and they were the first group to do that. They were still constructing the building at that time, and they let them in. First county board meeting was in May. The first marriage license was issued in June. When I found this, I was like, oh, that's interesting, because I was here the day the last marriage license was issued. We were moving Sue Ertmer out of the office, and this couple walked in, and they needed a marriage license. She's like, oh, okay, well, you're going to be the last ones to ever get a marriage license in this building. So I wish I would have wrote down the date, but first divorce was June 10th, so opposite side of that. First jury hearing, and then the courthouse dedication. They had opened the building by June 15th. It was open to the public, and departments were moved over. But July 27th of 1938, they had the formal dedication of the building, school bands, the whole shebang. And then in August of that year, they transferred the prisoners from the old courthouse jail to up here. I think there was about 24 of them at that time. June 15th, they opened. And then this pamphlet, I don't know if this is this an original? Oops. This might be a reprint. Well, they had these printed up for that occasion. It was a dedication booklet. And I guess everybody in the county was supposed to get one of these as just a commemorative thing of when the courthouse was built. There's some great pictures in there, and they talk about the history of the county and trying to get this project underway and getting it built. This is a picture of the county board at that time after the courthouse was built and occupied. So after it was all said and done, it cost just under $1 million, and it got the nickname the $1 Million Courthouse, which that was a lot of money back then, you know, during the Depression, but we got it done, and there was no relief money used. There are people out there that say, oh, it was all relief money. There was no relief money. It was funded by the building fund that they started in 1918. They worked hard on collecting delinquent taxes at that time to help fund it, and they issued building bonds. And they did a wonderful piece about the courthouse being built in an issue of Wisconsin Counties back in August of 1938. So it was quite a feat getting this building done. And it's interesting because I read some of the accounts of, you know, getting this done, and county board chairman and some of the judges were like, oh, you know, we wanted to build a courthouse that was nice, but we didn't want to make it extravagant. It's very, you know, straightforward, plain, not extravagant. It's like brass must have been super cheap back then, and marble, and, you know, all the decorations we see now, you know, but back then they were like, it wasn't a big deal. So that is my presentation.
When did they tear down the other courthouse?
1939. Yep. So 39, the brick building on between Otter and Seepy came down, and then the original wood frame building came down in 49 because the city didn't want it there anymore. Hopefully this one will stay here a long time.